How do I get my wife to want me again? That's the question so many men ask. And yet, it's the wrong question. Because the real problem isn't romance. It isn't passion. It's proximity. You see, the moment two people move under the same roof, something shifts. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens slowly, quietly, like a slow leak in the foundation of a house. At first, you don't notice it. The weekends feel exciting. Her toothbrush next to yours makes you feel chosen. The sound of her laugh in the kitchen makes the place warmer. You believe you're building something permanent. But over time, that comfort turns into something else. The mystery fades, the anticipation dies, and the spark that once pulled you together becomes the pressure that pushes you apart. I remember a night in my own life, sitting at the kitchen table. The clock ticked past 8. She scrolled on her phone, her face lit only by the screen. I stared at my plate, not because I was hungry, but because I didn't know where else to look, and it hit me. We weren't lovers anymore. We weren't even friends. We were roommates. And that realization, it changes everything. Because the shift from lovers to roommates is the slow death of desire. And no marriage, no long-term relationship, survives long without desire. Look around. Think of the couples you know. Neighbors, friends, relatives. How many of them still look at each other the way they did in the beginning? How many still flirt, still laugh, still touch each other with the same hunger? The truth is, very few. Studies confirm it. Less than 12% of couples, after 8 years, still describe themselves as in love. Less than 3% say they feel obsessed, in a state of bliss. So what happens to the rest? They settle into quiet routines. They coexist. They tolerate each other's habits, until, eventually, tolerance becomes resentment, and resentment always finds its way to disgust. And disgust, my friend, is not just another argument. It's the countdown. Once disgust sets in, there's no rewinding the clock. No amount of therapy or date nights will erase that feeling when she looks at you with distaste. That's the beginning of the end. And here's the part no one tells you. Living together doesn't guarantee closeness. Sometimes it guarantees distance. I've seen men try everything to save it. Weekend getaways, counseling, buying bigger houses, hoping more space would solve the problem. But space in square footage is not the same as independence. And when independence dies, so does the spark. Because attraction needs air. It needs longing. It needs mystery. And when you share every second, every habit, every routine, you don't feed attraction. You suffocate it. Think about the first time she came over. You cleaned the house. You shaved twice in one day. You set the mood. Because her presence wasn't guaranteed, it was earned. But once she's there every morning, every night, and with her shoes in the hallway, and her things piled next to yours, the anticipation disappears. And without anticipation, desire withers. Now, I know what some people will say. That's just what happens when you're comfortable with someone. But comfort isn't the same as connection. And boredom isn't the same as love. When a man feels more lonely inside his marriage than he did when he was single, that's not comfort. That's erosion. It's the slow wearing away of what once made the relationship alive. And the cruel part is, most men don't see it coming. They think moving in together will fix things, that it will bring them closer. But the opposite is usually true. I've met men who swore that living together would make their girlfriends more loving, more affectionate, more secure. Instead, they found the opposite. The more available they became, the less they were desired, and they end up asking that same question again. How do I get her to want me? But the answer isn't found in trying harder. It isn't found in giving more. It isn't found in proving yourself. The answer is this: you can't force desire. You can only protect it, and the best way to protect it is to never suffocate it in the first place. That's why independence matters. It's not about being cold. It's not about refusing love. It's about preserving the very thing that makes love worth having. Because once you lose independence, you risk losing respect. Once you lose respect, you invite resentment. And once resentment turns into disgust, the relationship is already on its countdown. So let me say it plain. If you want closeness, don't confuse it with cohabitation. If you want love, don't bury it under routine. And if you want peace, don't trade it for captivity. Because living together may sound romantic, but for most men, it becomes the silent beginning of the end. I used to think moving in together was progress, that it was the natural next step. You date, you spend weekends together, and eventually you share bills, groceries, mornings and nights. That's what society tells us. That's what friends and family expect. Isn't it time you two moved in together? They say it like it's proof of love. Like living under the same roof is the ultimate commitment. But here's what I learned. Cohabitation doesn't always feel like love. More often, it feels like a cage. At first you don't see it. You're excited. She brings her things over. The fridge is suddenly stocked with foods you never bought. The bathroom counter is crowded with bottles and brushes. Her laugh echoes in the hall. You tell yourself this is what building a life looks like. But slowly, the weight settles in. Your favorite chair isn't just your chair anymore. Your closet isn't your closet. Your schedule, your habits, your silence, all of it is now shared. And every decision becomes a negotiation. Do we watch the game or her show? Do we eat out or cook at home? Do we spend Sunday in peace or with her family? None of these questions are bad on their own. But when every choice is a tug of war, you stop feeling free. And when you stop feeling free, you stop feeling alive. I remember walking through the door one evening, after a long day at work. The house should have been my refuge, my quiet place. Instead, I felt pressure before I even took off my shoes. Her sigh from the kitchen, the tone in her, hey, the unspoken complaint hanging in the air. I hadn't done anything wrong, but it didn't matter. Because living together isn't about big mistakes. It's about little cuts that bleed you dry. Where did you put that? Why didn't you clean this? Can't you just do it my way? It's death by 1,000 corrections. And slowly, you realize the truth. You're not sharing life. You're losing yourself. That's when men start saying the things we've all heard. I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. Who? I feel incarcerated in my own home. And the saddest one of all, I feel more at peace at work than I do at home. That's not love. That's captivity. And yet, this isn't just about emotions. It's also about consequences. Because in America, living together doesn't just mean sharing space. It can mean sharing liability. Most men don't realize this until it's too late. Spend enough time with a woman, share your home, live like you're married, and the state may decide that you are married. It's called common law marriage. And once the government calls it marriage, everything changes. You might think, we never signed a license, we never said vows, we're just living together. But the court won't care. The law can still treat you as if you tied the knot, which means alimony, which means division of assets, which means fighting in court for things you built long before she ever moved in. I know a man who learned this the hard way. He was wealthy, divorced, kept his own home, dated a woman for years, never married her. They spent time together, dinners, vacations, weekends. But the court decided it looked enough like marriage, and he ended up paying her $50,000 a month. Not because he broke vows, not because he failed a contract, but because the state said, your relationship counts. Think about that. $50,000 a month. For someone he never married. Now, not every case is that extreme, but it proves a point. Living together isn't just about who does the dishes. It's about exposure. Legal exposure. Financial exposure. And sometimes, even paternal exposure. Because here's another truth most men don't hear. If you let a woman with children move in, you might not just be her partner. You might become liable for those kids. Courts have awarded child support to men who weren't even the biological fathers. Men who simply lived with the mother and acted like a father figure. Imagine that. You date a woman. She moves in. 4 years later, the relationship ends. And suddenly, you're ordered to pay child support for a kid who isn't even yours. It happens. And it happens more often than you think. So let me be clear. I'm not saying every woman is out to trap you. I'm not saying love is impossible. But I am saying this. When you live together, you aren't just sharing love. You're sharing risk. Emotional risk. Financial risk. Legal risk. And too often, men walk into that risk blind. Because they were told it's the next step. Because they believed living together was proof of love. But proof of love doesn't need a lease. It doesn't need shared closets. It doesn't need a judge to interpret your private life. Proof of love is how she treats you when you're apart. Proof of love is how you both respect each other's independence. Proof of love is choosing peace over control. And that's why so many men, especially men over 40, over 50, can say the same thing when asked if they'd live with someone again. Never. Not because they hate love, not because they hate women, but because they finally learned the hidden costs. And those costs are heavier than loneliness could ever be. They told us modern relationships are built on equality, 50-50, partners in everything, equal say, equal power, equal responsibility. On paper, it sounds perfect, fair, balanced, but in reality, it often feels like chaos, because when no one leads, when no one takes responsibility, when no one sets the frame, the relationship drifts. It doesn't move forward, it spins. I've seen it with my own eyes. Two people fighting over every decision, from bills to vacations to where to put the couch. Every discussion turns into a negotiation. And negotiations, when they never end, don't feel like partnership. They feel like exhaustion. It's like two drivers fighting over the same wheel. The car doesn't move smoothly. It swerves, it stalls, and sometimes it crashes. That's what living together often becomes. A constant tug of war, a slow bleed of patience, and eventually the death of respect. Because here's the brutal truth. Respect dies before love does. And once respect is gone, desire doesn't stand a chance. At first, you brush it off. The sighs, the small complaints, the way she rolls her eyes when you speak. You tell yourself, it's just stress. You make excuses. But over time, those little signs turn into something darker, and that darkness has a name. Disgust. Disgust doesn't scream. It doesn't throw plates. It doesn't even argue. Disgust is quieter. It's the silence at the dinner table. It's the way she pulls her hand back when you reach for hers. It's the look in her eyes that says, I don't respect you anymore. And once disgust sets in, it's not a rough patch. It's not something you fix with therapy or flowers. It's the countdown. The end is already on its way. I'll never forget one night. I came home late. She sat at the table, a glass of wine half empty in front of her. The room was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. I said, hey. She didn't answer, didn't even look up. And in that moment, I knew. We weren't lovers. We weren't friends. We were just two strangers trapped in the same cage. That's the climax no one warns you about. Not the arguments, not the chores, not the bills. It's the disgust. Because once it arrives, the relationship is already over. You're just waiting for the clock to run out. So what's the alternative? Do men just give up? Stay alone forever? No. The answer isn't isolation. It's independence. And that's the part most people miss. Independence doesn't mean loneliness. It doesn't mean bitterness. It doesn't mean swearing off love forever. Independence means peace. It means you no longer sacrifice yourself for the illusion of closeness. It means you value your freedom enough to protect it, even from the people you love. In the feminine good and two, some of the happiest couples I know don't live under the same roof. They date, they love, they commit, but they also keep their space, their independence. And that independence keeps the spark alive. Because attraction needs distance, desire needs mystery, and respect needs boundaries. Without those things, love suffocates. With them, love has room to breathe. I know this goes against everything society teaches, but look at the divorce rates. Look at the men who whisper, never again. They're not cold. They're not broken. They're awake. They've seen what living together really does. They've paid the price once, and they won't pay it again. So if you ask me today, is independence really better than living together? Here's my answer. Independence isn't just better. It's necessary, because peace is priceless. And once a man loses it, he'll do anything to protect it again. That doesn't mean you can't love. It doesn't mean you can't commit. It doesn't mean you can't build a life with someone. It simply means this. Love must walk through the front door of peace, or it doesn't belong in your house. And if that means living apart, so be it. Because solitude doesn't destroy a man. It rebuilds him. The man who chooses independence isn't running from love. He's protecting the only thing that makes love possible. His clarity, his freedom, his peace. So maybe we've been asking the wrong question all along. Not, How do I get my wife to want me again? Ask P. But how do I protect myself from losing everything that makes me worth wanting? That's the question men over 40, over 50 are finally answering for themselves. And the answer is independence. If you've ever felt that living together stole your peace, drop a comment saying, "I choose peace." And don't forget to subscribe, because here, we're building a community where men's voices are heard and respected,